Hi, Annalisa Six here with the Lady of Leisure and the Sober Curator, and I am here to talk about how I got sober 7 years ago. My sober date is December 29th of 2015, and there was definitely a series of events that led towards me deciding to quit drinking. I'll kind of start, I'm like, do I want the short version or the long version? I kind of want to give a little bit of an in-between version. I feel like I'm a long-winded person. I like telling stories, and I know not everybody has the bandwidth for that, but I think that the stories that we tell, especially in relation to how we get sober, help normalize the feelings that we have and also help to give some background as to how far people have come, because I think a lot of people that meet me in my life now know a version of me that hasn't been me most of my life or at different phases of my life. And one of the things that I went through early on in my sobriety was I got really into working out and got really fit and got really, like, my addiction kind of went towards health, like I kind of replaced that addictive mindset with getting really healthy, which I think can be a good thing to do, depending on how you do it. But a lot of people that got to know me around that time, I think I made sobriety look like it was a lot easier than it actually was for me. And so I think some background on me might help put certain things in a context, especially with the content that I create now. Because I don't talk a lot about my before sobriety time as much as I used to. But I actually was a huge advocate for sobriety when I was a kid. I really thought that I was never going to be into drugs or alcohol. And when my friends were starting to get into drugs and alcohol, when I was in middle school, I was a super punk rock kid. I was very self-destructive in other ways, but not with drugs and alcohol. Drugs and alcohol actually scared me quite a lot. I read a lot of like rock bios about people who overdosed, and a lot of my idols had passed away from that stuff. And so I've been a very observant person since I was a kid, and I don't want to repeat other people's mistakes. I really want to learn from that stuff and make better choices. And so when I was younger, I found other ways to be self-destructive, but I really was adamant about not choosing drugs or alcohol. And as I got older, I started to feel really isolated in that decision. All of my friends were a lot older than me. I had friends that were my parents' age. My friends that were my age were all drinking and partying, and I would go to parties and have fun and be sober. And a lot of people really didn't even believe that I wasn't drinking because I was having so much fun and just being crazy anyways. Like, I don't need drugs or alcohol to be crazy. But a lot of people would think, they were like, oh, she must have drank that night. And I'm like, no, that was just me. That was just my crazy self already. So, I didn't really feel like I had any reason to do that stuff. But my teenage years were pretty difficult, as most people's are, but they were especially difficult. And I ended up moving out of my home when I was 16 and living on somebody's couch. And I had told myself when I was younger that I would never disrespect my parents by drinking while I was living under their roof, which is funny because I don't think my parents probably would have even minded that much if I drank at the time. I think they thought I was doing that stuff when I wasn't still. Like, I was such a good kid when I lived at home. I didn't smoke, I didn't drink, I didn't do any of that stuff. But once I was living out on my own, and my roommate was 23, and there was a lot of concerts at bars that I wanted to go to, and I would usually end up standing outside looking through the window. Everybody knew me too at the time of like the group of people and the shows that we were going to. And so it was kind of this joke that, I needed to get a fake ID so that I could at least go into the bars with my friends, because all my friends were older than me, way older than me. And so I finally get a fake ID. and I start going to bars and it's really fun. And then it's just this slow kind of peer pressure of like, when am I going to have my first drink? When am I going to get drunk? When am I going to do this? Like everybody's just like counting down, like, when is she finally going to do it? And so eventually I'm like, okay, fine. If you buy me a drink, I'll drink it. And I remember getting drunk for the first time and feeling like the feeling of it felt really similar to a feeling that I already felt. And once I got into astrology years later, like deep, I've always loved astrology, but once I learned how to become an astrologer and do astrology, that actually makes sense in my birth chart why I had that feeling the first time that I got drunk. And I'm actually going to share my birth chart on my sober anniversary, like the day that I chose to be sober, because there were some things going on astrologically in my chart that are really common for people when they choose to make big lifestyle changes like that. So I thought, since I'm one of the in-house astrologers here, it would be a cool way to show how astrology played a role in my sobriety. I wish I knew the date of the first time I drank, because I'm sure that it would show up in my birth chart too. But I didn't really like the feeling that I had when I drank. It just made me feel slow. It made me feel dumb. And it made me feel disassociated. That's the best word that I can use for what drunk feels like for me, is disassociated in a way that I already feel. I have a Pisces moon. Pisces is ruled by the planet Neptune, which rules alcohol. So disassociating is something that I'm naturally very good at doing. And so alcohol tends to be something that people with a lot of Pisces in their chart or heavy Neptune placements end up gravitating towards. But I do feel like I had kind of this inherent wisdom that knew that that was not a good path for me. However, I was surrounded by so many people at the time that were drinking and using drugs. And I think I just kind of gave up. I just felt like a constant conversation and a constant fight to be the only sober person there. And so I started doing drugs and I started drinking, and that led to me smoking cigarettes. And it was really fast. I became an addict super fast. I was doing lots of cocaine, like on a regular basis, and going to work drunk and high, like doing kind of like a combination of those things. I was partying every single night. And I was having a blast, to be honest. I was 17, living on my own and having a freaking blast. But it got really destructive really soon. And I could tell I was becoming such an addict so quickly and so early that I was really like, I could see myself ending up a heroin addict or something like that. And so I ended up leaving Seattle when I was still 17 and tried to get clean off and on for a few years. I think I went a full year without doing any hard drugs, and then I would still drink occasionally, but I would have like months or periods where I wasn't drinking, and I would just call them breaks. But I would always end up going back to it, and when I'd go back to it, it was regulated. I was definitely able to have a beer or a couple beers and not get crazy. But I always wanted to do drugs, and I always wanted to smoke cigarettes every time that I drank. I think one of the things that's hard if you have a history with certain drug abuse and drinking together is that the two become symbiotic. So for me, like if I drank, I was gonna want to smoke cigarettes and I was gonna want to chain smoke. If I got high, no matter what the drug was, I was going to, want to smoke a lot of cigarettes. I was going to want to drink. And so it was just kind of this thing that I would fall into every time that I drank. It wasn't like people who have alcohol in their lives and they just have a glass of wine with dinner and they're fine. Like it really became a way for me to constantly cope with my life, escape my life, or even use it to enhance my life. I think that my relationship with cocaine is really similar to how people feel about caffeine. I still have caffeine in my life, and I do feel like cocaine is like an accelerated version of that. And I think that it gave me this sense of self and sense of energy that I lack. Like I tend to be more of a low energy, disassociated person. And so when I would drink, I wouldn't like how I felt drunk because I already feel kind of sluggish and disassociated, and I would immediately want the upper, you know, and so I would do the upper to counteract the other feeling that I didn't even really like having to begin with, but that feeling helped me get out of the anxiety or stress I was having about my life. Just a terrible up and down kind of thing, which I think that another thing that's kind of important to talk about is that even with me cutting out alcohol and cocaine and hard drugs and cigarettes, we still have these helpers in life that help us cope with reality. And so it's like, I take melatonin at night to help me sleep. It doesn't get me drunk, but I'm still taking something to help me sleep at night, not every day, but occasionally. And I still drink coffee, which has caffeine in it. And I love the way caffeine makes me feel. And so that's still kind of an upper, and so there's a lot of drugs that we take in society that are considered to be okay and normal. And I think that the distinct part between when you have a problem versus when you don't have a problem is how it affects your life and how it affects your health and how it affects the other people around you. And so I'm definitely not anti-alcohol. I know a lot of people that can regulate their alcohol intake and it doesn't destroy their lives and they don't make terrible choices. But it was definitely destroying mine, and I was definitely making poor choices. Drugs, I think, like cocaine and heroin and meth and speed and things like that destroy lives. They destroy your body. They destroy your relationships. They make you very reactive. It's not the same as drinking a cup of coffee where you're just getting a little bit of a jolt, and you don't have the same health benefits that you can get from coffee either. And nowadays, when things are so dangerous to even do recreationally, like laced with fentanyl and stuff like that, you're just at so much more of a risk for death even. So I think that there's some distinctions there, because I think that one of the things that I've battled with in my sobriety is, legalization of certain drugs that were really destructive to my life, as well as the lack of education and awareness around some of that stuff. And the way that we educate our culture about how to use those things, I think we get into this very black and white thinking, like alcohol and all drugs are bad. And I don't necessarily think that it's as black and white as that. I think that it's definitely nuanced, and I think it's different for each person. But I do think that there's drugs on the scale that are bad. And I think that alcohol is a poison. And I think that what it chemically and scientifically does to our brains and our bodies is not good. And so while I'm not anti-alcohol, I don't think it should be something that we're normalizing as much as we are in our culture, or doing to the extent that we are. And so navigating my own sobriety, I talk about that because those were the types of thoughts that I had when I would drink and when I would do drugs and when I would be thinking about that. So I'm a very philosophical person. So like, I don't have black and white thinking. I'm not an all or nothing person when it comes to my beliefs. However, I kind of have to be an all or nothing person when it comes to my choices, because I have a hard time self-regulating. And so I can think that way about things, but when it comes to physically doing it, I'm wired a lot more to get to overdo something. And so that was a really conflicting thing for me. I could have these logical thoughts about my alcohol intake or even my drug use, because it was, I was able to do drugs recreationally, not all the time, and so that felt like it wasn't a problem if I could just do it sometimes. But when it started to get to the point where I was driving home somewhat drunk and high, and praying that I don't get pulled over, and praying that I don't make some dumb choice and get in an accident, that was when I started to realize, like, this is a problem. Like, if I drink to relax in this environment and then I'm having to get high to drive home, like, that's a problem, and that's definitely dangerous. And I could end up in jail, and, all that those thoughts started going through my mind. When I became self-employed, I decided to start a dog walking business. And when that started, I also started to care a lot more about my reputation and my community, because other people that I knew that were business owners that did drugs recreationally or all the time or were heavy drinkers, I heard what people said about them. I also had my own judgments about them, and there was a lack of trust and a lack of respect that people that couldn't handle themselves like that had in the community. And so when I started my own business and realized that I was representing myself and that my money and my reputation and all of that was going to be dictated by who I was as a person, I also started to feel really self-conscious and sensitive about how I conducted myself in public, and especially in social circles. I didn't want to have a reputation as a dog walker coming into people's homes who also had problems with drugs and alcohol. I felt like there's certain connotations with that that I did not want to associate myself with. And I realized that I needed to start really caring about that kind of stuff if I wanted to be a member of my community that had, that was trusted and respected, coming and going out of people's homes with people's pets. Another thing that started to happen, because I was still smoking at the time, was when I was dog walking, I was spending all this time out in nature and breathing in all this fresh air and exercising every day. And even though I'd gone through periods of exercising regularly when I still drank and smoked, I was not under 25 anymore. I was starting to, I was still kind of under 25, I guess, during this time, but I was starting to enter that period where I was feeling the consequences of drinking or smoking when I'd be outside and hiking around and stuff. And so that was not fun. That didn't feel good. I also was really self-conscious about smelling like cigarettes or my car smelling like cigarettes, just so many things that I didn't used to care about. When I was younger, I was super rock and roll. I didn't care about anybody. I was like totally into breaking the rules. It was like, F everything, F society. I'm going to do what I want, But once I had this business that I was really proud of and wanted to do well with, all of that changed. I really wanted my clients to be able to trust me with their animals and want to hire me. And I wanted to be able to do my job well and not feel like crap in my body. And so I started having a lot of those thoughts. The straw that broke the camel's back with my sobriety, when I fully decided to quit drinking, was my husband was playing a festival in New York, and I had flown over to go to the festival, and I ran into one of my first roommate, who was also the first person I ever drank with, and we hadn't seen each other in a really long time, and it was just a really special moment for us to see each other at this show and to dance together and have fun together. And we partied until 7 o'clock in the morning, and some stuff went down that night that I'm not proud of and that I'm not happy with. And it was a really dangerous situation. It was a dangerous situation. I'm not going to share all of the details because I don't know if that's something she would appreciate, but basically, like, I don't know if she'd ever watch this, but still, I'm going to respect her privacy. It was such a horrible night, and I partied so hard that I missed out on the rest of the festival because I had to stay in bed the next 2 days while I was there. And it was kind of humiliating. Like, I was embarrassed. Everybody else around me who seemed to have partied just as hard seemed to be able to rally and keep going. I could not. I was not okay. And so we came back from that trip, and there was a couple other nights kind of peppered in there where I had some partying, and I was just in this period of humility and reflection of just feeling like my actions in the daytime, where I was this business person, like self-employed business person operating this like kind of more healthy lifestyle during the day, wasn't matching with this person that I kind of used to be, that was still partying occasionally on the weekends in these really intense ways that my body was definitely telling me was not constructive anymore. It was feeling more of like an existential crisis. I'd also always told myself, I was like, do what you're going to do drugs, drink, do whatever you're going to do, as long as it's fun and as long as you feel like you're able to manage it. But as soon as it's not fun anymore and you're having anxiety and you're having what I call the fear, don't do it. Don't do it if you're going to be anxious. Don't do it if you're going to regret it. Don't do it if you're going to have, you know, regrets about it. And that started to happen to me. There was this window where I felt like I could do that stuff without feeling that way. And then there was this window where it started to move into a darker place. And it definitely felt like I had to reevaluate that mindset. That mindset wasn't working for me anymore. So I went out with a friend on December 28th to a bar in Oakland, and we had a couple drinks, just a couple. It wasn't like a big heavy party night. I think I had 2 gin and tonics, and they have giant Jenga at this bar in Oakland, and we played giant Jenga, and we had a great time. This friend of mine, I absolutely adore her. We still hang out. We're still great friends. And it was just a really fun, wholesome ladies' night, just a couple drinks and playing giant Jenga in this tiki bar. It was so great. But during that hangout, I could feel what the alcohol was doing in my brain. And I started to feel like there was 2 versions of me. I felt like there was the version of me that was watching myself, that was like the higher self that still had her wits about her and still was very cognizant of what was going on. And then there was the self that was like in the experience, in the 3-dimensional experience of what was going on, and experiencing the alcohol slowing me down, slowing my brain down. I could feel, it felt like my brain cells were dying. And I just remember feeling like the words coming out of my mouth were dumber, and just, I could feel it dumbing me down. And I remember just being like, I don't like this. Like, this just feels wrong. And I went home that night feeling like I need to make a change. Like, this is not, I'm not in alignment with the person that I want to be in my life. And I don't think I can do this anymore. Like, it was this deep, deep, deep reflection. And another thing that had happened that day, was Lemmy Kilmister from the band Motorhead had passed away, and I had just seen him play a few months prior to that at the Warfield in San Francisco. And my husband had got us tickets for my birthday. I had never seen Motorhead, and it's one of my husband's favorite bands. I love Motorhead. I had seen Lemmy play in a different band, but yeah, I'd never seen Motorhead still. And so we went, and I remember when we were at that concert, he did not look good. And I remember like we were leaving, and I looked at my husband. I was like, I don't think he's going to be around much longer. Like, he looks like he's about to die. And sure enough, 3 months or 4 months later, he passes away on December 28th of 2015. And, you know, when I went out with my friend, we like had a drink for Lemmy. And I've had so many friends prior to this pass away from drugs and alcohol, that every time that like any of my friends or I would commemorate one of our friends passing in this manner with drugs and alcohol or getting drunk, I always saw the irony of that and just how terrible it was. I'm like, why are we drinking and continuing to do drugs to mourn the loss of this person who died this way? You know, like, it just felt really stupid to me. And I didn't want to do that. Like, having a drink for Lemmy, who loved to drink, obviously, until the day he died, but also like the toll that it took on his body. He would have lived a lot longer if he had taken better care of himself. Like, I'm sure he seemed like he had a great life. I'm sure he's happy he went out the way that he did. I hope. But, you know, I mean, obviously you can be a healthy person and still, you know, get cancer and have bad things happen to you. But I just felt like I don't want to do this to my body. I don't want to be this person that drinks to celebrate, or not celebrate, but, you know, commemorate people who passed from their lifestyles being like this. And I don't want to perpetuate that. Like, I didn't want to be that way when I was a kid. I saw that when I was a kid, and I would read these like rock biographies, and I became it, and I'm embarrassed about that, and I wish that I hadn't. And I'm glad that now I have the experience to bestow and pass on to others. But, you know, it's not something that I'm proud of either. You know, sure, I have some really fun memories of, there's some memories that I'm glad that I have, that I had that window of partying with, but I'm glad I got sober when I did. So the next day, December 29th of 2015, I had a complete meltdown, like just breakdown emotionally. And I remember being in the shower and my husband like sitting on the toilet and me just crying and me telling him, I have to stop drinking. Like, I can't keep drinking because I can't stop doing drugs and I can't stop smoking cigarettes if I don't stop drinking. Like, I knew that all of that was symbiotic. Like, the only reason why I still smoke or do drugs is because I'm still drinking. The only time that I really care about doing those other things is if I'm drinking. Like, I'm not somebody that can just have a drink and not have that whole other world seem appealing to me. Like, I just want to get high and chain smoke the whole time. So if I want to quit smoking cigarettes, if I want to quit doing recreational drugs, like, I'm gonna have to quit drinking alcohol. And I don't even really like alcohol that much to begin with. So I was really afraid that I was going to lose my husband. I was afraid that my husband, that was going to be a deal breaker for him. I told him that too. I was like, I know this isn't what you signed up for when you married me. I know that having a sober wife and somebody that's about to embark on this journey in this way is not what you thought you were getting married to. And I told him, I was like, if that's a deal breaker for you because this is an important part of your lifestyle, like, I totally get that. Like, if this doesn't work out and it's just not what you wanted in a partner, I understand that. And a big reason for me why I felt the need to say that was because of my own relationship with my own father. My own father, when I was a very young kid, sat me down and told me, after some things had happened with his drinking that were really I was really young, and he had done some things when he was drunk that hurt me really bad. And his response was that alcohol would always be a part of his life and that there was nothing that I could do about that. And that if I had a problem with that, that I could leave. That was my father's response. I think I was 8 years old when he said that to me. And so I've never felt like it was fair to me to expect somebody else to choose me over their own lifestyle choices. I still feel like to each their own, but as a kid, to hear your parents say that, alcohol is more of a priority than you and that you should just leave if it makes you uncomfortable when you're that young, is really hard to go through. And I still have a hard time with my dad with that stuff. I don't think he'll ever watch this, so I don't really feel that bad sharing it, but that's our relationship. He's made it very apparent that that is his lifestyle and that his alcoholism is that important to him. So, me getting sober, I really was afraid that that was going to happen with my husband. I thought my husband was going to have a similar response. And thankfully, that's not what happened. I know that it doesn't go that way for every relationship, but my husband was very accepting of what I needed to do. He was not sober for a year after that. And it affected our marriage really bad. His relationship with alcohol and drugs, started to impact our marriage once I was sober. And we had the rockiest year that we've ever had since we've been together. And about a year later, after I got sober, he got sober, and we were still together. We went to marriage counseling and worked through a lot of that stuff. We did not go the AA route. I'm super pro AA, but we just didn't at the time feel like that was what we wanted to do. And so we didn't. I actually wrote a bunch of blogs in my early sobriety on a blog that I had that's still up called thebitchyparrot.com. And I actually have some videos here on YouTube from that period of time too, when I first went sober. And I wrote some blogs just about how to get sober without AA. And I wrote my own 12-step plan for myself that worked really well, really helped me. And so I do feel like I'm one of the rare cases of people that get sober without a direct community in that way. I definitely had friends, definitely had community. I also was afraid that I was going to lose a lot of my friends, and that didn't happen. I actually had a ton of support and didn't lose any friends over it. And it was definitely the best decision that I could have made for my life, because after I got sober, it was only 2 months before I quit smoking. I haven't had a cigarette since February 8th of 2016. I never did cocaine again. And I spent about 5 years without any marijuana products. And now I'm actually considered Cali sober because I started experiencing some chronic health issues in 2020. And in 2019, I went to the emergency room for a slip disc in my back and was put on a couple prescription drugs for muscle pain, muscle relaxers. And I also used to abuse muscle relaxers. So that was a really hard thing for me to navigate when I have a chronic back injury and health problems and I'm getting prescribed stuff that I had drug problems with. That's another thing in sobriety that you don't always hear about, is how hard it is when you have a history with pharmaceutical drug abuse to have pharmaceutical drugs prescribed to you and know how to use them in a non-abusive way. And so what I ended up finding works best for me now with my chronic pain, because I'm experiencing some health issues that emulate fibromyalgia that I'm still in the process of getting diagnosed, but I experience chronic pain daily and I have some problems with my cognitive function, and I'm having I have a back injury that flares up all the time. And so I've been in physical therapy for 4 years. And in order to avoid the pharmaceuticals and not abuse pharmaceutical drugs, I started taking edibles in 2020 for my pain. So they help me sleep. I take one at night. I'm not like somebody that takes an edible and is that way all day. For some reason, I'm really able to regulate that. I think part of that is because I didn't really like marijuana throughout my life. It was not a drug that I enjoyed. And so I do have it for medicinal reasons. And I do it in a very like structured way at night for bed, wake up. I don't wake up in an immense amount of pain like I was. And I know that cannabis is a lot better on the body than pharmaceutical drugs are, especially for long-term use. So that was also something I had to work on, was after being completely free of everything for 5 years, accepting something back into my life to help aid in this health problem journey was really hard for me. I went through a lot of shame and humility around like needing something for my pain, and having to navigate, do I want to be on muscle relaxers or do I want to do something more holistic like cannabis? And that was a hard thing for me to navigate. But after trying the pharmaceutical drugs out and trying the cannabis out, I decided to go with doing cannabis for the pain management. So they call that Cali sober. I don't do anything else. I don't do any other, caffeine, melatonin, and nightly cannabis is, I guess, where I'm at with that. Some people would not consider that fully sober. Some people see sobriety as not having anything ever at all. I was one of those people. I was so trying to be like this perfect, clean person. And, I'm a very healthy person. I eat very, very healthy and take really good care of myself. But, I have all the stuff that, they say people with fibromyalgia have, like irritable bowel syndrome and, history of anxiety and depression and an injury that causes chronic inflammation and pain. So it's kind of like the perfect recipe for all the other stuff that I have going on. So at this point, I'm just grateful that we're starting to work into more holistic methods. I'm not anti-pharmaceutical drugs at all, but they do have really long-term health problems for a lot of people. And as somebody that used to abuse muscle relaxers, it's not a fun thing for me to have it around me or in my life, and same for my husband. So we don't like having pharmaceutical pills like that around us very much for that reason. So yeah, that was my journey into getting sober and how I even started drinking in the first place. Peer pressure is real. Even when you think that you're really strong and not going to give in to peer pressure, it happens if you're in certain social circles, and especially when you're going through stuff. I was not as strong in myself at the time that I gave into peer pressure because of everything going on in my personal life at home as a teenager. And it just made me give up. Like, I was just like, fine, I will drink, I will party. I give up life. I'm tired, So I have a lot of compassion, empathy for people that are really struggling in life that turn to drugs and alcohol. The pandemic was definitely hard for me. And I I think that one of the other things that I'll share before I get into my birth chart, I know this is a long video, but hopefully it's helpful for somebody. Um, I feel like the first few years, like I know for the sober curator, we were talked about kind of speaking to our first 90 days. I think that you have so much motivation and determination in the beginning that like earning the length of time becomes really empowering. And then the longer that you go, the harder for me, at least, I don't want to speak for other people, but the longer that I've been sober, the harder it's gotten, because I don't have a lot of sober people physically around me right now where I live. Um, I moved and started like a whole new chapter of my life during the pandemic, and that whole pandemic thing really triggered a lot of my stuff. And I know that when I used to drink, it was really easy for me to make friends, not necessarily the right friends though, but I was really social. A lot of people really enjoyed hanging out with me more when I drank. I feel like, at least back then compared to right now. And so I am going through kind of like another isolating phase of sobriety, and having the chronic health issues has made it hard too. So I feel like I understand why people celebrate each milestone, even after it's been 10 or 20 years, because it doesn't necessarily get easier. Life doesn't stop. You still go through hard stuff. You still experience loss and pain and heartache. You still experience depression. You still experience anxiety. I think one of my biggest pet peeves in a lot of the sobriety culture is we talk a lot about the areas where our life gets better, and it does. I'm living in this beautiful house that my husband and I bought. So much of my life leveled up when I got sober. So much about everything got better. My marriage got better. My relationships with people got better. My relationship with myself, my spirituality. That's how I got, into becoming a tarot reader and astrologer. And it changed my life. Like, it changed my life for the better. But there's so much about life that doesn't go away just because you're sober. I think that the hard parts about sobriety are that you really have to sit with stuff that you avoided, and the healing journey from things that you've avoided is really hard. And it can make connecting with other people hard if you have a lot of other people around you that aren't working on themselves in that way. So it can feel really isolating at times. But that's why I'm so grateful for the sober curator, because this community that Elise has started has been really great for me to have somewhere to express myself in that way, and to see other people successfully doing it at all different stages and different years, different paths, different ways of doing it. So I think that's really important thing when you're navigating your sobriety, is to find your community. So I'm going to end this by just doing some astrology talk. So we're going to look at my birth chart on the day that I decided to go sober, and just talk about some signatures that happen when you are becoming sober. So one of the big, I've talked to some other astrologers who went sober during this transit, but one of the transits that happens for a lot of people when they are deciding to make a big lifestyle change like this is the planet Saturn going through the 12th house of somebody's birth chart. And when I learned that, and I saw that that was what was happening in my chart on the exact day that I decided to go sober, I was just like, that makes so much sense. That astrology is crazy. But the 12th house is that house that Pisces traditionally rules, that the planets Neptune and Jupiter rule. And so Neptune is the planet that rules alcohol and drugs, not all drugs, but just kind of like the state that we want to be when we do drugs, like the escapism, disassociating. Neptune dissolves, it dissolves everything. And so we are entering that kind of void. I remember when I started doing drugs, I would end up in these very philosophical conversations about the meaning of life. And these are conversations that I love to have no matter what. Like, I don't need to be higher on drugs to have them, but a lot of other people would not want to have them with me. And when I would be high with people, they would want to have them with me. They'd want to talk about consciousness and reality. And that was really appealing to me about doing drugs, was because other people were getting into this state where they were opening up and being vulnerable. where they weren't doing that when they were sober. I didn't know that I just needed to find a spiritual community, and I would have had that. I wanted to connect with these rock and roll people that seemed to only be okay talking about that stuff when we were high. So that's a very 12th house thing, where people feel their boundaries or their rigidity melting away, and that they can be more open in that way. And for me, I'm a Pisces moon. And so I naturally am like that. And having Sagittarius rising, Sagittarius is that very philosophical part of myself that also needs that. I'm just wired to want to connect with people in that way. And so drugs and alcohol were a catalyst for me to be able to do that, as they are for a lot of people. And I don't think we always talk about that in the reason why we get attracted to drugs and alcohol too. It melts away our awkwardness about who we are in that way. So Saturn is the planet that rules Capricorn and Aquarius, and Saturn is the planet that's kind of obsessed with boundaries, but it has to do with rules and responsibility, and also karmic lessons and consequences of the choices that we're making. Sagittarius is the sign that has a lot to do with our religious and spiritual belief systems. And so a lot of times when people are going through certain things, and Sagittarius is a big key player, the kind of way that I've guided people is you have to ask yourself, are you in alignment with your values? And whatever that means to you. We all kind of have this core higher self where our heart space is, that is our value system. And we can feel, how I was saying when I was in the bar, that the last time that I drank, where I could feel my higher self watching this lower self. And it was kind of this higher self being like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing with your life? What are you doing with yourself? Why do you feel the need to dumb yourself down this way? Like, this is stupid. And so that higher self is a very Sagittarius kind of energy. It's that, what are your beliefs? And is this other person, the avatar that you're playing, in alignment with that core value system? And if these two are in alignment, we start to have anxiety, we start to have existential dread, we start to have fear, we start to feel like we're not existing in our full truth or full authentic self. And Sagittarius is all about the truth and all about seeking the truth. Of course, the truth can be objective or subjective, right? So Saturn passing through the 12th house, that consequences planet, that responsibilities planet, that it's the father kind of coming in to say, are you doing what you should be doing? In the 12th house that rules the subconscious, and where I have Sagittarius and the Placidus house system, came in and was like, are you living in alignment with who you are? Are you living in alignment with your values? Are you living a life that you can be proud of and feel like you're really holding up what your beliefs and your ideals are? Saturn in Sagittarius does that anyways. But having Saturn passing through my 12th house, the house that Neptune rules alcohol, it's just, I was going to go sober when Saturn was passing through my 12th house. Like, that's the time when you want to do those things. The other thing that's happening in my chart that I thought was interesting, that I don't think I remember, is that Chiron, who is called the wounded healer in astrology, Chiron's a planetoid and is the centaur that in the chart represents a wound that we carry that we have a hard time healing. And so wherever it is natally for us, mine is in Cancer in the 7th house, that is somewhere that we have this like internal area of healing that we're constantly working on. But when it's in transit, it could be an area of our life that we're working on for a period of years, and then it'll move into a new area of our life. And so on the day that I decided to quit drinking indefinitely, Chiron was at, let's see what degree point Chiron's at. This bar from the Zoom is in my way, so I need to move that. It was at 17 degrees of Pisces. My ascendant, my rising in Sagittarius, is at 17 degrees. So Chiron, the wound, was squaring my ascendant. My ascendant is a big part of who I am and my sense of self and how I'm putting that out into the world. So when we're talking about how I was reflecting on my reputation and like how I cared a lot about how people that were hiring me saw me and kind of the way that I would be perceived by my community. That was a big player, having Chiron squaring my ascendant, which is that sense of self and how I'm putting myself out there. Chiron was also really close to my moon, and my moon is what I emotionally need. And it's also in the sign that rules alcohol, Pisces. So of course I'd be working on healing issues around that. Also, the moon that day was in Leo and making an ingress towards my south node and my sun, which this is a very karmic point. So it also makes sense that I would be reflecting on my destiny and whether or not I was living in alignment with what I felt like was my true calling or my true path. Because that's what the south node and the north node have a lot to do with. So the moon definitely played a little bit of a role there. There's probably more going on in this chart, but those are the main things that I wanted to point out. We had, you know, Saturn passing through the 12th house, which when Saturn's passing through the 12th house, we really start to existentially question our existence, our beliefs, and whether or not we're in alignment with them. And for a lot of people, when Saturn is passing the 12th house, if they have issues with drugs and alcohol already, they're going to be experiencing the consequences of those actions more directly in that house placement with Saturn there. And so a lot of people will experience their version of rock bottom, or they might end up in trouble with the law in some way, or they might find themselves having some religious or spiritual experience or a spiritual awakening, which that came later after I went sober. I started to have really intense spiritual experiences while Saturn was still passing through the sign of Sagittarius. So yeah, that was the astrology that I wanted to bring into it. There's definitely a few other things I'm seeing that I could go off on a tangent about, but I'm gonna stop here because this was a long video. Feel free to let me know in the comments if you resonate or relate to my story. If there's any other videos you'd like me to share on how I got sober, tips for getting sober, tips for maintaining sobriety, what it was like integrating cannabis back into my life after not having anything like that for 5 straight years. I live on the West Coast in California, and so cannabis is a pretty being Cali sober is a pretty regular thing out here, but I know in a lot of other parts of the country or other states where cannabis is illegal, it probably seems still pretty taboo. I was talking to somebody that lives in Texas recently, and I was just like, God, we live in such a different reality having that legalized now. It just feels like an over-the-counter thing. It just feels like the same as taking ibuprofen for me at this point. And I do my edible instead of ibuprofen. Like I get all the same benefits, but even more because it's helping like all my chronic pain issues. So, yeah, we're just in an interesting time period with all that, especially when it comes to like microdosing for psilocybin, like mental health stuff. I think that we're going to see the sobriety conversation expand a little bit beyond where it's currently at, because I think it's a little bit more nuanced than just black or white. But yeah, I've been alcohol free since that date, December 29th, 2015, and hard drugs and cigarettes. So I don't do anything else other than caffeine, cannabis, and melatonin. Those are my 3. And I feel like that's pretty good. So proud of where I'm at today. And thanks for watching.